Hello and welcome to Game Brain, a board game podcast about our gaming group. I am your host, Matthew Robinson, and that was a live, beautiful interpretation of our opening theme jingle by Drew Conley. Thank you so much, Drew, for playing that. That was absolutely impressive. We played it for him once, and then he just did that.
Yeah, it's close enough, I guess. I got some bits of it.
It was great. I loved it. It was beautiful. Hi, everybody. Matt Robinson here. Also joined today by fellow co-host Jordan. How are you, Jordan?
I'm doing well. How are you, Matt?
I'm good. Good to see you. And we have, as we heard in our opening in that beautiful piano piece, we have friend of the show, Drew Conley, joining us today. Welcome, Drew.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
We brought in Drew today because we are going to be reviewing Arcs, the game on everybody's mind at the moment, it seems like, in the board gaming world. And we have been playing quite a bit of Arcs over the last weeks, month, maybe even. And Drew was involved in so many of those games and our experience coming to sort of fall in love with that game and learn about it, that we wanted to have Drew on the podcast today to talk about that. So we felt that he was the perfect friend of the show to bring on the pod and talk about Arcs with us today.
That's right.
There we go. Drew, why don't you tell people a little bit about yourself, your history with gaming, and anything you want to talk about in terms of yourself?
Cool. So I grew up loving games. Played games with my family. Typical Monopoly, Clue, kind of classic games. And then I guess in high school, got introduced to Catan, but that was kind of it. It was like just Catan. My group of friends, we just played that over and over.
Right.
And then really it was like college, playing Dominion, sort of being introduced to Cosmic Encounter, in Race for the Galaxy, Innovation, those kind of games that just like blew open kind of the world of board games.
We had very similar starts, it sounds like. Yeah, that is like the classic path to Eurogamer.
Yep, totally.
Yeah, me too. Catan, then Dominion, yeah.
Yeah. And even Innovation was like a big one for me. That was like, whoa.
Yeah.
Like the minute Carl Chuddick was introduced, I was like, oh, I'm in for life.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there was a guy who lived in my dorm who had the like full set of Dominion. He had like a briefcase, and he just like opened it up and had all these cards, and I was just like amazed.
That's awesome.
That this one game can kind of like expand to this much, and like you just play it over and over and over.
I still love Dominion. I will play that game anytime. In fact, I play the app a lot. The app is amazing.
Man, I haven't played in years.
It's so fun.
Yeah.
The app is really cool. The new app it's on iOS and Android and everything. And I think it's even on Steam. It's really good. I mean, it's $100 if you want to buy all the expansions.
Oh my God. Wow.
There's like a $99 bundle. I have not done that. But the nice thing is that every like month or so they rotate out the free sets.
Okay.
So you're always playing with like base plus intrigue plus a few other sets, I think.
And you're playing against the computer, or you're playing against
No,
people?
there's other people too. You can play live, and there's like people get very competitive, obviously.
Sure.
In that game, super fun. So Drew, you actually, I didn't even realize that I had been playing Agricola with you for a long time.
That's
I
right.
didn't. I
Yeah.
I knew you as your Agricola name, and then I knew you from in-person gaming, and it took me a minute to realize that they were the same person.
Yeah,
That's
and
awesome.
a fun story too is I actually bought a copy of Agricola from you just based on
That's
like a
right.
local board game like Facebook
right.
post or
I
something.
forgot that too.
So when you switched over to Revised, I got your old edition.
Oh, that's amazing. And then I had to rebuy the old edition when I became obsessed with it again.
Yeah,
That's awesome. Well, you've got very good taste in games, Drew, and you were one of the first people that I knew who had played Arcs as well, and that you guys were playing it on TTS. Were you playing even old versions of it?
So
before the final version,
I think both of us, but not together perhaps, played the original version of Arcs
when it was on Kickstarter.
It was a very different game at that time.
How different? Like, are we talking apples and oranges, or like
No,
how
not that
drastically
different. I mean,
different?
so a few of the differences, well, we can talk more about them later, but basically
sure.
you would the biggest difference was the way resources and cards worked. And then the map was totally different too.
Right.
Actually, it was quite different.
Quite different.
It was way worse. Like it was like not as good of a game for sure.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, We're going to get into ARCs in a second. There's a lot to talk about. If you've been to Board Game Geek at all in the last month, you'll notice that every hot review is of ARCs. It's just like it's sort of taken over the site in a way that I'm not sure I can remember another game doing it. Even when Gloomhaven first came out, it took like a couple of years, I feel like, for it to become something that was spoken of outside of the gaming world. And I feel like already ARCs is I'm seeing it outside of the usual channels of board game media and actually stretching out into a more mainstream thing for a game that is not friendly for the masses as any sort of a gateway or intro game.
Yeah, it's interesting. I feel like a good comparison point might be Scythe. I feel like when Scythe came out, it was publicly discussed in a variety of medias. But
it took a while because it was just things moved slower then in the gaming world because there was just that much less content being produced. There was a lot less people playing.
Yeah, and there are articles like on New York Times, for instance, about what beginner games to buy, and they say buy Wingspan, whatever. But I saw a review of ARCs, like a full length review on Forbes this morning. That's right. So ARCs is really breaking out. Yeah,
that is wild. All right, well, we will get into ARCs soon. But first, let's talk about the games on the brain. I'm going to box fart it. Nope, hold on. There we go. Let's talk about the games on the brain, the games we've been playing lately. I was out of town for a while and did not play games at all while I was out of town. But when I came back, I dived back into the games pretty hard. The main things I've been playing, of course, are ARCs. That was the main game I wanted to focus on for most of June and July. But I also got some other fun games in of new medium to heavyweight Euro Pampero, which we can talk about briefly, which I thought was pretty interesting. I've also played El Burro, which Ben has publicly lauded and loved, and I can see why he loves it. I had a really good time playing it. I've also been a little bit on a Knizia tear out of nowhere, and it sort of started because I got Hwang delivered from Kickstarter, which I had forgotten I even backed, which is sort of... I don't know if I'm hesitant to say evolution. It is a new version in the system of Tigris and Euphrates and Yellow and Yangtze. And it's very similar to those, but has enough differences to make it hold its own. I have played a lot of Tigris and played a lot of Yellow and Yangtze, and I thought Hwang was a very clean, fun version of that. But those games don't get to the table very often because they're slightly abstract and they're not short. And so it's rare that we want to play that type of a game at a whole game night, which then led me to sort of go back to my shorter Knizias. And I started playing Through the Desert. I got the new version of that delivered as well around the same time. And then Jordan brought a little game called Cascadero one night.
That's right. So Cascadero just delivered off Kickstarter, the latest Knizia. It's a 45-minute game. It's not quite
at most.
At most. It's almost like I hesitate to say like a cube rails game, but it's like a Northern Pacific type of game where all you do on your turn is you put one thing on the map. And there's scoring for connecting various cities and getting various objectives, but it's quick, it's breezy, it can still be thinky, and I think what really, like, the one rule that really sells the game on this is there are 5 tracks that you can move up on for connecting the 5 different colors of city, but you have to get to the top of your own color track. So you'll be either yellow, blue, pink, whatever. You have to get to the top of your own track, and other people can stop you. And that's a really interesting thing.
And if you don't get to the top of your track,
you are not eligible to win.
Which is a classic Knizia thing. Knizia always has those fun little twists in the scoring explanation where you're just like, oh, that's devilish. That's fun.
That makes this endlessly replayable as we think about ways to get in each other's way.
So we're going to talk about Cascadero for a second. I want to hear what everybody else has been playing, and then we'll come back to Cascadero. But I just do want to say that Knizia is just shocking how this is so... The Good Doctor, as he's often called, has been making games forever. You've probably played a Knizia game, even if you're not in our hobby. He's made Modern Art, High Society, Samurai, like I said, Tigers and Euphrates, Through the Desert, Raw, Lord of the Rings, The Confrontation. I mean, he's made so many games stretching back until the early 90s. And the fact that I just played a 2024 Reiner Knizia game, and it was like, it's like my second favorite game I played this year. And I'm just like... Damn, that's impressive.
Yeah. Feels like a modern classic.
Yeah, already. It kind of does. Like, honestly, I played it once and I bought it instantly. And it instantly is maybe my favorite Knizia. Anyway, we'll come back to it in a second. So, Jordan, why don't you tell us briefly what you've been into lately, what you've been playing, what memorable reps you've had?
Yeah. So in addition to Arcs, Pampro, and Albero, and Cascadero, actually, I played almost all the games you mentioned.
Yeah.
With you. But also, I've played recently a game of Aura et Labora, an old classic, but
Great
a
game.
great 2-player game. It was really fun.
I'd say it's a masterpiece in our hobby.
Yeah. And I also revisited Concordia recently. So some of these old
another
Euro
masterpiece.
masterpieces. Yeah. And we've been playing Age of Innovation on
BGA.
BGA.
So Board Game Arena has just put Age of Innovation into beta, and it is going to ruin my life.
It's so good.
It's my favorite. I mean, it is my favorite iteration of the Terra Mystica Gaia Project stuff, and the fact that it's now in a beautiful form on BGA and is only going to get better and have a great competitive scene. I'm just very excited about.
Yeah. And then lastly, I'm always playing Blood on the Clock Tower.
Yes,
Can't get
we
enough
had a
of
fun
it.
Blood on the Clock Tower game together.
We did.
Yeah, we played 2 even.
That's right. And they were both good.
I love Blood on the Clock Tower. And the more I play it, the more I love it. I'm just really enamored with that game, and I just think it's a wonderful way to spend a night.
Absolutely. Absolutely. What about you, Drew?
I mean, Arcs has basically taken up most of my gaming time, but I will mention Slay the Spire, the board game, another super exciting release this year, and just played so much of the video game that I knew I had to have the board game, and it's been a joy kind of introducing that game to other players and like seeing them learn it for the first time who have not even played the video game. Just pick it up, and to be able to play co-op was super cool.
So you actually put that game on my radar because I had originally backed the Kickstarter campaign for it at $1, and then had just gone like, what are the odds it's going to be good? Like I had already seen the Darkest Dungeon board game just become nonsense, and like all these. I was just like, what are the odds that somebody isn't just cashing in on a great video game? And well, the odds were low, but turned out to be a great game. I mean, like a really cool. So just briefly, so Slay the Spire is a great roguelike deck building game, video game that came out a while ago that is on literally every platform that exists in video games. I've played, no exaggeration, at least 500 hours spread out over different platforms. It's an incredible game and inspired by board games.
For sure.
It was like one of the first video games I was like, oh, clearly this person is a board gamer who designed this.
Yeah. Actually, one of the creators of Slay the Spire was a like prominent member of the Netrunner community too. So like big into card
That's
games.
amazing.
Yeah.
That's cool.
So like big into Netrunner, big into Dominion. So the whole concept of Slay the Spire was like, can we make a compelling deck building game that's solo playable? That's you're not fighting for victory points. You're actually like achieving objectives. You're
Most
fighting
board
monsters.
game player ambition of all time.
Yeah, for sure.
How do I get 1 million reps of this in without needing anyone?
Yeah, and Slay the Spire is so fun and replayable because you're always finding these new combos, and you can play out decks that are doing infinite combos and crazy things, and you're not like waiting for other people to take their turn, and like there's no time restrictions like there is with board games. And yeah, so that was kind of one of the concerns I think when the board game was announced, was how would they like have that sort of same feeling but be able to play with other people and have it be in a manageable amount of time. And I think they've done that pretty well. I wouldn't say I'm itching to play it more than 2 players most of the time.
Right. So yeah. So basically, like an entire run of Slay the Spire, the video game, if you go all the way to the end, I won't spoil what actually is the end. If you go all the way to the end, 90 minutes usually, even on the slow side, I think. An hour to an hour and a half, you could beat the whole game in.
If you're like really strategizing, thinking about all of the moves, all of the ins and outs, like it can be.
I mean, people can bang it out in
2
45
hours.
minutes sometimes.
For sure. Yeah, you can play faster.
I would say 1 act of an in-person game of Slay the Spire is about that. So you're looking at a minimum of an hour an act. So it's 3 to 4 hours if you want to actually finish the game, and that's probably at 2 players. 3 or 4, it's getting pretty. It could almost be like a day game if you wanted to really like go all the way.
For sure.
But that being said, I don't know. I don't know why it's so satisfying to play in person, because it is the exact same thing. They've just lowered the numbers. So like instead of having, you have like 10 health. So it's like so all the numbers are just sort of taken to single digits instead of double or triple digits. But it's so satisfying somehow to actually just do it in person. Like it's just funny to see somebody make a video game inspired by a board game and then translate it back to a board game. And Well, yeah, duh. Of course, it works as the board game, like
same
really
thing.
well. Yeah, and the idea of being able to play it with your friends is the seller here to actually do it as a co-op, and they do a really good job of that because the turns are free flow. You have your sort of lane of people you're attacking. Your friends have their lane, but you aren't stuck in your lane. The only thing you're stuck in is that's the lane you're taking damage from. But you decide, I want to help you up here. You help me down here, and that's actually like a really fun planning thing that has no chance of real like quarterbacking. You feel like you're building your own character, your own deck that does its own things, but you're adapting to maybe filling in the holes your friends' decks don't, handle.
Yeah, for sure.
Pretty awesome. Any other notable gaming before we move on to Cascadero?
I've been playing a lot of Balatro, which is in that same vein.
Balatro.
When are they going to make the board game of Balatro? That's the question.
Exactly. That's the joke.
Balatro is fun. That's the sort of poker themed roguelike.
Yep.
I wish it was Texas Hold'em. I want the version of the game that's when I first heard it, I was like, damn, they made a roguelike out of Texas Hold'em. That's the best. But I still think somebody could do it. But like that was the game I was hoping for. Instead, it's sort of 5-card stud in a way, which is like just not a very interactive
I
game.
feel like now with what we've seen of Slay the Spire and how that's sort of inspired other board games, and I feel like we're going to see more like poker themed.
I mean, like if they can find the addictive nature of everything that's great about Texas Hold'em and like expand it into the board gaming world, I think that's $1 billion idea.
Yeah, and like we're going to get there with ARCs, but obviously like taking a known quantity of like card games and then porting it and like messing with that system, using it in a new and interesting way, I think is like super cool, and it worked for ARCs. So
along this line of thinking, I have a game on my shelf of shame that I backed on Kickstarter called Ante, I think. But if it's not called Ante, I'll come back and double check. But basically what it is it's a space game where you move around and collect poker chips. And then between every round of the game, you play a hand of poker and you bet those chips.
Antimatter?
It is Antimatter.
Antimatter.
Thank you.
That's the better title.
It is a better title. So you're going around the board collecting chips, and then you
sci-fi fantasy mashup of strategy and Texas Hold'em. That's all I've ever wanted.
So cool.
Yeah, it's a really cool premise. I haven't played it yet. It doesn't have rave reviews, but I'm interested to try it. So if you guys want to play
I just
sometime,
described this game and now it exists.
it
I
exists,
want to play it.
and it's on my shelf. We could play it right now.
wow.
Well, we'd have to leave the pod. Okay, let's go.
Okay. All right. See you guys.
Let's talk about Cascadero really quick because it's a game. Drew just played it for the first time right before we started doing the podcast.
I did, yeah.
So, Drew, why don't you tell us a little bit about it? You just played it. It's fresh in your mind.
Yeah, I loved, and I've been playing also these other Reiner Knizia games, and I love about these games how just the map is wide open. It has like almost no restrictions on where you can place any number of your 40 little pieces. And it's just about like starting somewhere and then figuring it out as you go. Like you might have some plans, but other people are going to block you. And it was really satisfying. I like the combos of moving up the tracks, kind of comboing into other things. You see this a lot in like Euro games, but I feel like less so in these shorter 20-minute games, which I found really cool.
So Cascadero is 2024 Knizia, 2 to 4 players, 30, 45 minutes. I'd put the weight at about 1.8, 2. I don't know. Well, with the, maybe go 2 to 2.5. But this is what's called a Knizia tile layer, which is a genre in and of itself. Even though there are no tiles that you are laying in this game, it just comes from Tigris and Euphrates or Samurai or Through the Desert or Babylonia or Blue Lagoon or Stevenson's Rocket. So it's a whole genre where you're basically on your turn placing something onto the board that is going to then trigger area scoring or majority, or you're building links to things, but he has a whole genre of these. So this is sort of the latest in that, where you have in essence micro turns. Something like Tigris and Euphrates, you're playing 2 tiles down, sometimes 3, or in Babylonia, sometimes 3. And in this, you are playing 1. You have horses, you have little wooden horses, and on your turn, you place 1 on the map. And then in addition to this very simple map that you would see in anything like Tigris and Euphrates, there is also, like Drew was saying, all of these sort of Terra Mystica tracks, all these sort of science tracks, which are not science tracks, but they're tracks that you are moving up on and getting rewards out of them. Sometimes they're more boosts on other tracks, or they're just an entire new turn, or very often they're points. But you're moving up those tracks to get score, to get points, but also to combo. So this is a very like a big combo game. It almost feels Feldian or even Lacerda-ish in that you can build to these epic turns where you do 30 things on one turn. And some people are just instantly turned off by things like that. But then there are people like myself who just fall in love instantly with any game that does that. And I just love the mechanics of putting together this sort of puzzle wherein at the end it's going to explode and do all these really fun things.
Yeah, I think that's right. And on the comparison point, I think this is probably closest to Blue Lagoon of the other Knizia tile layers. But I think what makes this game spicy, makes me like really want to think more about it is the way the game ends. Because it ends either when someone gets 50 points or when someone runs out of horses.
Yeah.
And that can be a race. You can try and go again a bunch because there's go again on these tracks.
I've seen them both happen equally.
Right.
They both, like, it's not like one of those games where it's like, well, this one never happens. No, it's like, it's 50-50.
Right.
Like sometimes half the games it ends because somebody plays their last, sometimes because you get 50. Yeah.
Right. And so you can, if you're trying to end the game, which in these games you often are trying to do, you have to decide, okay, am I going to end the game by rushing my horses out or am I going to rush to 50 points and try and win that way?
Yeah. And then just the classic Knizia, like, oh my God, that's the funniest thing ever during the teach, where somebody tells you during the teach, by the way, unless you get your colored track to the top, you are not eligible to win.
Right.
So, so by the way, do all the things I just taught you, but you also have your own mini game of you must get to the top of your own colored track or you cannot win no matter how well you did.
Right. But if nobody gets to the top of their track, then whoever has the most points still wins.
I don't know how often you'd see that. I feel like, I mean, maybe in a game where there's a lot of blocking, a lot of where like, if like a third of the moves are anti-other player moves as opposed to pro you moves.
Yeah. Or if you go really fast and you place out your horses really quickly, you can maybe end the game before someone gets to the top of their track. Yeah.
I kind of want to see somebody try that.
Yeah. And so the game has like 4 variations in how you play it. And one of them on the back of the board introduces
it's a double-sided map.
Right. It's a double-sided map. And on one side, there's a bunch of cities. And essentially the different variants on that side are where these heralds are. And if you go next to a city that has a herald in it, you get one more bump on that track.
Right.
But on the reverse side, there are all these tiles that randomly go out to give you other bonuses, including
during setup, right? You never place them during the game. Yeah.
Right. And the bonuses are go again, move a herald, get some points, go up a track, etc. And the cities are further apart. So inherently going up the tracks is just a lot harder on that side of the board, but there are other bonuses. And so in that style of the game, I can see it going to horses more.
You're right. Maybe that might be there for the other variants have different levels of it. But yeah, I mean, just there's so much game in this box. Like there's 4 different ways to play the game, and they all are very different. I mean, there's the base game. There's sort of the 2 herald variation. Then there's just moving the different herald starting positions, and then there's the other side of the map with like the farmers on it.
Right, and all those different variants are extremely simple. Right, they change 1 or 2 small rules, but the game feels dramatically different, which is great.
So here's the difference, and I want to hear everybody's opinions on it. I just want to say one thing about: is this a Knizia game for you and or non-gamers? And so to me, what actually I loved about this is that this feels like gamer Knizia. Like, I don't think this would be a great game with non-gamers. You definitely could. But just the tracks, the achievements, you're also racing for these achievements on the board. It's more than most Knizias in terms of in terms of Through the Ages, it's twice as complicated. Even
through the desert. Yeah.
Through the desert. I mean, sorry, I always say Through the Ages.
I agree. I think it has a lot of that. Yeah, the goals aspect that if you've played a lot of board games, you'll pick up on faster. Mm-hmm. But I think actually the spatial aspect of just placing the pieces out, it's like one of the simplest to understand. Because what I struggle with some of the games, like Tigris especially, I've played it like one time, but I just remember like my brain melting because I couldn't understand why you were placed, why you'd want to place here.
Like those games are heavy as hell.
Yeah, like conflicts happening between pieces of different colors,
battles, the
things
wars.
Like that. Yep. And this, it just felt so generous. Like, I can see, like, I need to rush towards these spaces to earn 1, 2, or 3 bumps.
Yeah.
And that was basically it. It's like, how do I get each of these bumps? it kind of clicked faster
Yeah.
than a lot of his other games.
It felt like it's in a really interesting space. So yeah, Tigris games like that, I would never teach to non-gamers. I mean, like at a game night where I'm trying to just like keep things moving. Like it's a lot, and like Through the Desert or Raw or Modern Art, I could teach to anybody without thinking about it. Absolutely. This is like definitely closer to that side of the scale, but in a really fun way where it's still like I like those games, but they're just one notch below something I'm excited to play.
I love Raw. I don't know.
Okay.
I love Raw.
I like it. I don't know. I'm not like excited about it anymore. I guess maybe that's the problem. And I'm just excited about this. But I don't know. Cascadero feels like that perfect thing where it's like, this is the gamer game that takes 30 minutes. And there's very few of those, I feel like, where it's like, this is not the gateway game that's fun for gamers too. No, this is the gamer game for 30 minutes of like deep, fun strategy and tactics.
Yeah. I think if I was going to start someone off on a Knizia tile laying game, I'd probably pick this one. And before this one, I would use Blue Lagoon, which I've done a number of times, taught it to non-gamers.
Blue Lagoon's super fun.
It's super fun, but there's a little added complexity with, okay, we're going to score this game twice, and here's what's going to change in between those two scorings. We have to pick up certain pieces and, rearrange certain things. And it's hard for them to plan for that in the first era of that game. And in this game, it's just like, here's the board, just go. And, I think it works a little bit more smoothly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It sort of allows you to pick your path too with the scoring, because you can focus on just leveling up all of your tracks, or you can go for specific goals.
Yep.
And I like how wide open that is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we're treating this as a little bit of a mini review because it's not necessarily a big enough game to warrant its own episode. So we can treat this as a little mini review of it. I think we've played it enough to do that. But Drew, you've played it once. Where are you at with it?
I would love to play more of it. I think it's a great kind of opening game, like you said, like just really thinky, gets you kind of into the gaming mood without taking a lot of time, like 20, 30 minutes.
Awesome.
Yeah, I agree. I love where it is because we've brought it out as the first game at a number of game nights now, and it doesn't take so much time that it detracts from the bigger games we want to get to the table, but it's still thinky and crunchy, and it brings Knizia to the table, so I'm loving it.
Yeah, I'm absolutely enamored with it. It kind of blew me away. And what's funny is I had just gone down this Knizia rabbit hole, and I had like just gotten Through the Desert and Huang. They just delivered, and then Jordan brings this, and I'm like, I have no room in my heart for more Cascadero. And then now it's the only Knizia I've played, like in the last couple of weeks, and I'm going to New York next week to be with family. I'm bringing it. I'm gonna teach the non-gamers this game and see how it goes, just because I just love it. And I think it's so awesome.
That's great.
Yeah, a little pricey. It's hard to spend $50 on a filler, but I did not. I was annoyed that I spent that much on it, and now I've played it so much, and I'm just like, oh no, this is like a keeper forever in my collection.
And the art's great. I really love. It's a beautiful board. And I'll mention, just as an aside, because we're talking about it, there is a roll and write version called Cascadito.
Yes,
which is a cute name. I have it and haven't played it yet, but it's it seems like a similar type of game if you're interested in roll and writes.
Yeah. So yeah, if you would all like Knizia or Abstracts or just 30-minute kind of gamery games that are, actually have chunky, weighty decisions that don't outstay their welcome, I really recommend looking at Cascadero. It definitely impressed me, and I was not expecting it or wanting to like it at all. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that leads us to ARCs. So I wanted to leave us as much time as possible to talk about this. So let's first open with some stats. ARCs is a Kickstarter-backed 2024 release from designer Cole Worley. You might know Cole from his previous games, John Company, Root, Pax Pamir. What am I leaving out? Oath. Those are the big four.
Did you say John Company?
I did say John. That was the first one I saw.
Sorry. Oh, excuse me.
Art by Kyle Farron, who you will know from Root and All Leader Games.
And Infamous Traffic.
Yes, of course. The game, of course, comes from Leader Games. It is 2 to 4 players. On the box says 60 to 120 minutes. We'll get into that. The BGG weight has it at 3.36 as of now in 2024. This is the biggest deal in our board gaming world in a couple years in terms of hype, in terms of just conquering the consciousness of board gamers, at least in our world, but also just look at BGG, and it's the only word you seem to see on the front page for the last couple of weeks. Shut Up and Sit Down just did a big review of it last week. It was glowing, to say the least. It's just sort of taken over the world. And let's talk about first why. Why do we think it has done so well? What do we think has led to that? And then we'll end with, do we think it's warranted, before getting more into the review? Jordan, you want to start?
Oh, man. Well, I think there are a few factors that generate hype. I think Cole Wehrle being on a game generates some hype.
Absolutely.
Very well respected designer. The art from Kyle Farron certainly adds to that.
You either love it or you hate it. But
Right.
most people love it.
Yeah. And, it's the next from Leader Games, and people love Root, and people love that sort of style of game. So it's coming from a great pedigree.
That's right. So a lot of this hype, I agree with that, is this sort of this slowly building train of general hype for Cole and general hype for Leader Games. And I think they both reached a pinnacle. And it may have happened no matter what the game was here. There would have been this much attention on it, I think.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. But I feel like when the Kickstarter, initially happened, there was a ton of attention, but not all of it was positive.
Right.
There was some,
It was unfinished. They
Right.
even, I don't remember the last game they put out that they were like, we'll get there. It's just not there yet, really.
right, and people were reviewing it and saying, "Is this Leader Games' first miss?" There were a number of articles like that. And it wasn't finished, but it was receiving a lot of negative attention. So I think the other reason why this game is receiving such hype is that everyone is playing it and loving it, right? It got the attention from Cole and from Leader, but it really managed to impress everyone who's played it. And when you hear, word of mouth, every single person is loving this game, or almost every single person is loving this game, that, that blows it up.
Yeah. And I think there's something to say that the theme of the game, especially coming from Leader Games, who has done more fantasy kind of style, and this has some fantasy in it, but just a sci-fi game. Like, there's just something about an excellent sci-fi board game that just brings people into the table. Like, I feel like it's a very popular genre of board games.
Yeah,
That's true.
I agree. This does feel to me like the perfect storm of hype in terms of, and I don't use the word hype in terms of people lying and saying things are better than they are for whatever capitalistic reasons. I mean it in the sense of attention and noise and it being all over everywhere. I think the 4X look of it, and we'll talk about whether that is accurate
And
or
the
not.
box shape.
The box, yeah.
It's like, oh, you have TI, you have Eclipse. Here's
Well,
the
we
big-
didn't know it was coffin shaped really until it was delivered. I was shocked by the size of the box,
okay,
at least. But I think it's the theme. I think it's the quick hook of like trick taking. What? And then Kyle and Cole and Leader and just years of people loving Root and I think it's built to this fervor. Okay, so that's how we got here. That's how the game became this hyped, and it makes sense. Now what's happening is that we're being hit with massive glowing reviews from everywhere. I mean, like Space Biff, Shut Up and Sit Down. Every early initial review on BGG is like game of the decade, game of the century, game of the year. Not to get into our final thoughts on the review at all, but let's talk about, do we think that this amount of attention is warranted? Or do we think that it's potentially just sort of something that will go away? That there's just a strange, just building a perfect storm of hype that is not necessarily deserved.
No, I think it's warranted. I think we'll be playing this game a ton for years and years. And there aren't that many games that you can add to your collection and think, I'll be playing this a lot in a few years.
Yeah.
But I think this is one.
Yeah, it definitely gives that feel. And I'm excited to dig deeper into that, into the review of actually like how much of that. Yeah, we'll get. I want to talk more about the
Sure.
the 10 years from now thing.
Yeah.
But Drew, yeah, where did this game come from for you? How did it get on your radar, and how has your sort of early experience with it been?
Yeah, so when I think of Leader Games and Cole's games in particular, I think what I respect about him is he always swings for the fences. And whether that's a hit or a miss with someone, it's always like taken to an extreme where I feel like this game versus maybe looking back at Oath, this is going to hit with a larger amount of the gaming population. So I think that kind of explains maybe why we're seeing so much of this hype and all of the reviews being a little bit more positive, is because it did take some of those lessons of his previous games, sort of gamifying it a bit and opening up towards a larger audience, I feel like. Whereas some of his games are seen as more niche in the hobby. And so I guess to explain where I came from with ARX, like Jordan, I played the Kickstarter version with a few friends and found it okay, but good enough where I had faith in Leader Games to kind of develop the project. So I backed it, forgot about it for a couple of years. I know a lot of the Kickstarter backers in the community like stay involved the entire time.
It was about a 2-year timeline between the Kickstarter and the delivery, right?
I think so, like summer 22.
Yeah.
And I just completely forgot about it. So I wasn't one of those active playtesters who stayed in the community. I was like, okay, I'll just get this game when it comes out. And cut to end of last year, I got an email from Leader Games, and they were reaching out to people who had volunteered for either playtesting or rules reading.
Right.
So I actually ended up doing some rules reading for the campaign, which, looking back now, it's kind of funny because I didn't fully understand like the current base game of ARX and its final state, but I was already looking at some of the campaign stuff.
Weird,
so I sort of cringe at some of my comments that I was giving them because I didn't fully understand the rules of the game, but they were just looking for general, like, can you read these rules and understand them? And initially I was kind of blown away with the ambition of the campaign, of the expansion, how the legacy elements work. I was reading, PDFs of all of these cards that were added into the ecosystem. And
what a confusing way to understand the game.
Yeah, it was very, very strange. So I did that. I was very impressed. I was excited for it. And then like a couple months later, I was like, okay, let's start playing this. People are playing it actively on Tabletop Simulator. And that was maybe like February or March of this year. And just like the first base game of it I played, I was like, this is so much fun. I think that speaks to the game too, is just like how much fun it is to deal with this hand of cards, this action system, whether you're playing, very strategically or not. Like it's just always a blast, I think.
Right. Okay, cool. So we've all sort of explained how we came to it, how we felt about it at first, but let's get into. I want to treat this not only as a review because this is such an elephant in the room in our board gaming world right now, and I want to look at it as sort of a postmortem on what it is, what it's like when a huge game like this comes out. So I've been in this hobby for 15 years. I can remember a handful of times a game came out that just like shifted the culture of board gaming. I came in like less than a year after Agricola first came out, and it was still the only thing. Like it was, I came in late on the hype wave of Agricola, and it was the only game you saw at conventions. It was all anybody talked about. It was the biggest thing ever. I remember when Barrage came out, nobody expected it, and I just remember it rippling through the community of like, holy shit. Like, we cannot believe that this game is this good. Wingspan, obviously, being one of the first big games to just get massive national and international news and attention on Time Magazine and all this crazy stuff. Of course, Gloomhaven was a huge cultural shift. I remember having, why am I forgetting the designer of Gloomhaven's name right now?
Isaac Childress.
Isaac Childress, thank you. I remember having Isaac on my old podcast before the game came out. And like, him just being just a guy who just made this in his basement and nobody had any idea what it was going to be. And like, so I've seen a few of these things happen, and it does feel like it's happening again. And I think it's interesting to take a moment and just look at the history of that, and also like what it means and how it affects us as gamers, as well as giving our, spoiler alert, pretty glowing review of ARX throughout this. So just something to keep an eye on as we keep going. But so let's take a 10,000 foot step back and look at the game in general and just tell you what is different about this game, what it actually is, and what is maybe special about it, and why we, spoiler alert, are enamored with it. So Jordan, let's start with just the basic mechanics of this game. What is ARX? How does it play? What is the main thing about it? And I think the first thing anybody that will tell you who asks, if you ask somebody to describe the game, they'll say the words trick taking. What does that mean, and how and why?
So the backbone of ARX is this brilliant deck of action cards. They're numbered 1 through 7, and there's 4 suits. And in any given turn or round of Arcs, I should say, you're going to get a hand of 6 of these cards. And you're going to sit there and look at it just like you would in almost any other card game and think, how am I going to play this hand out to achieve the maximum results? But unlike in other card games where, oh, I just want to win a trick or, oh, I want to get some points or whatever, there's this huge space game that is sort of glommed onto it that you have to consider while you're looking at this hand. So every suit in the deck has 2 or 3 different actions that are on it, and there's some overlap among the different suits. But what's going to happen is someone's going to lead a card, just like in any trick-taking game, and they're going to take the actions on that card. And then other players can either follow the same suit, playing higher to take a number of actions in that same type, or play any other card and take one action of that card, or that card face down to take one action of the lead suit. So it sounds a little complicated, but basically you're going to be playing out these cards to take these actions. And I think that little backbone of the game is, now that I've played like 30 games of Arcs, is so good. It's just so juicy, right? Like looking at your hand and just, figuring out how you're going to play it is such a fun experience that everyone can relate to from other card games. So I think that's one of the things that makes this game so special, is just, looking at that hand and figuring out what you're going to do.
What's also interesting is that so many of us in the board gaming community are recently coming off of a trick-taking renaissance, which is just such. I mean, it's not funny timing. Cole was going through it too, obviously. Obviously, trick-taking was on his mind when he was designing this. But you can go back and listen to the episode from a year ago where we did a 2-hour episode just on trick takers and how it had taken over my life and how I was importing trick takers from Japan and was so into it. And I still play a lot of trick takers and love them. That's mostly what I'm bringing to New York next week. And I am not atypical. There were so many board gamers who realized how fun it was to have these really cool, interesting trick takers as fillers or just things to throw in your backpack. And then all of a sudden, after, within a year or two of us all going through this trick taking renaissance, here comes a all-day game that's a space theme, that's Cole Worley, that's Leader Games, that has its backbone as trick-taking. And it's just perfect timing.
Yeah. I mean, trick-taking is just the best mechanism for, just having play that is so skill-expressive, but so simple. I could play this hand in a million different ways. So I think that having that in an all-day game and feeling like you can really get better at this by thinking about how to play these cards really gives Arcs something special.
And how does it relate to turn order?
You can seize the initiative, which is kind of the first player marker. And that has a lot of implications in the game. Leading is very strong. You get the full actions on your card.
I can't believe going first in a Euro is important.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
But it really makes it like this dance where you're kind of, you're weighing do I need to try to take the initiative to enable my game plan, or can I kind of sit back and just play my hand out how it is? And I find it really exciting how the turn order is always shifting because of that.
Right. When do I need to be aggressive so that I can lead my next card so I can get the full value of those pips? When can I not afford to be aggressive? I need to just take one action on my turn.
All right, so trick taking is the backbone of this thing, but how do you win? How do you get points? And that ties in nicely to being first player. Do you want to talk about that a little bit, Drew?
Yeah. So if you are the first player, you can declare an ambition, which means you take one of these scoring markers and you put it in one of 5 categories. So the 5 categories being Tycoon, Tyrant, Warlord, Empath, and Keeper.
Off the top of his head. Well done. That's how much we played.
And basically, you are declaring this as a scoring condition for the table, not just for you. So it's sort of a bet. We've been talking about poker mechanics, other card game mechanics. This is like saying, all right, I'm pushing my chips towards this scoring condition, and I think I can win it at the end of this round over everyone else.
But if nobody declares any ambitions, then there's no points, right?
Yeah.
Wow. So you have to decide. The players decide how to get points?
Wow, what a novel concept.
Right.
That's pretty crazy.
And when, right? You could declare the very first card you play into a hand, or it could be, your final card played into a hand and no one's decided to declare before that point. So when do I wager? Because the minute I say, hey, we're scoring X, guess what? Everyone's coming for X.
I can hear a little bit of a PAX influence here in the sense of not everything is always scoring, and at certain times things are decided to be scored, and there's a little bit of the players decide what this game is going to care about. Is that true?
Totally. Yeah. It differs from something like Root, where you're kind of you're dripping points at the end of every turn. So it's just about a race of who can, cross the finish line in a certain amount of time. Whereas this, it will, like, all scoring will take place at the end of each round. So you're kind of just jockeying for positions, for scoring, trying to be ahead at the very last moment.
Right. And we should add that declaring is such a high risk maneuver, not just because you're putting other people on notice and declaring what's going to happen, but the minute you do that, your card becomes a 0, in terms of its value, meaning that everyone else can probably play higher, and by playing higher, take the initiative. So you're putting yourself in a weaker position.
You're saying, I want to score this, but next turn I will have probably the least amount of ability to influence that.
Right, exactly.
So the ambitions are a huge part of the game. Trick taking is a huge part of the game. The third thing that I noticed as being pretty impressive and special in this game was the resources. There are 5 resources in the game, and there are 6 of them each. That's it. 6 pieces of cardboard for each resource. This is a pretty closed economy. There are other ways of getting those for scoring things. All the court cards, which we'll talk more about later, have those suits or resources on them as well. But for the most part, everybody in the game is trying to fight over these resources. And one of the main reasons you need resources is that 3 of the scoring conditions care about who has the most resources.
Of particular types.
Right. So, a couple of them care about, there's one that cares about 2, the rest care about 1, and you're trying to see who has the most of those at the end of the round, and whoever has the most of those will score the higher number on the scoring card, and whoever has second will score the second highest number on the scoring card, the scoring token. But there are only 6 of each. So it's like, okay, we each have 2. Now what? Well, and the answer to that is conflict. We are going to have to kill each other for them, or find them on cards, or seek them out in other ways, or it instantly puts you into conflict. It's not just who can race to collect the most. That happens very fast, and then they're gone. The rest of the game is hot potato, who can keep them the longest.
Right. I mean, how many times have we put ourselves in a position to acquire a resource that we really want or need for our strategy, only to find, oh no, even though I could make one of those, there are none in the supply. So I can only get one from you.
Yep. That was the first thing I had read the rules and I had not checked the components. So I just thought there was 100 of each. I just thought it was like a typical Euro where there's just, I'm going to have these little cups filled out with all these resources, and we're going to be, okay, keep going, keep getting them. No, but when I pulled out the game and I realized I was punching them, I was like, wait, there's fucking 6 of each. That totally shifted my concept of the game. It's like, that's the game. Now that's the huge part of the game is like daring to even have 3 of one is putting a target on your back for that resource for the whole game.
And all of the resources have an alternate use. So they're used in scoring, but they have an ability to spend in your prelude, which is like before you take the actions on your card. And just because they are so limited, you're weighing that decision of, do I want to pull off this cool combo move where I spend a bunch of my resources, but then someone else might just tax them and take them after you spend them. So
how important is action economy in this game?
It's everything.
It's everything. Yeah. It is literally the most important thing, because when you play a card, like Jordan said, there's a couple of pips on them that's going to tell you how many actions you get.
It's like 2 to 4.
2 to 4.
1 to 4.
Right. That's how many times you can do the action of the suit of the card. And then other people usually, unless they're playing a higher number and means they're going to have fewer pips, are usually only doing 1 or 2 actions on a turn. But these resources that we just told you are extremely scarce can be spent for more actions. But by spending them, you are giving up those resources, meaning you're not going to score points for them, and you're also putting them back into the economy and other people can take them. But you need those actions to do things, and it puts you in this immediate awesome quandary.
Right. We're scoring this resource type at the end of the round. I need to use it for its action, but there are none in the supply. And the minute I put this one back in,
gone.
someone's going to eat it. And now I'm behind on the scoring.
Yeah.
And it's not even just about like action economy, like doing more actions. It's about flexibility, really, because the resources allow you to take combos that aren't available just by playing one action card. By playing one action card, you get 2 or 3 action types that you can take. But as soon as you start combining resources, you can do like multi-step processes all in one turn, which allows you to quickly grab a card from the court or move and battle on a card that you wouldn't normally be able to.
Or move much farther than people might think you would be able to by building a star base and then moving.
No, you can quote unquote break the rules or break what people think is possible in a turn with a weird combination of prelude actions.
Right.
Now, so we've talked about the trick taking, we've talked about the resources, we've talked about how you get points. But when I sit down to play this game, mainly what I'm going to see is this giant space map. What the hell is that all about? How does that integrate with all of these other mechanics? This does not sound like you've described a space game or a TI4 clone or a 4X of any sort. So what is this whole map doing?
So there are 6 sections of the map or sectors, and each one has a gate space and 3 planet spaces. And when you're playing the basic game, 2 of those or one of them is going to be closed off. So you're going to have a different map in every game. And each planet on the game board corresponds to one of the 5 types of resources, and we'll have 1 or 2 building slots, and you'll be fighting over those. And
with what? What are you fighting with?
Well, you'll be fighting with ships, and you'll be fighting for building spots, cities and star bases. Cities that let you tax resources off those planets of the matching type, and starports, that allow you to build ships and move farther.
So all those cards on those actions you're playing are mainly used to make your cities produce resources, or as it's called in the game, tax them, move your ships around to maybe other planets you want to control or tax, or get you closer to your rivals so that you can attack them and score their points on killing their ships, or steal their resources so you can score points off of the resources. And the map is abstracted, right? I mean, we wouldn't say this is not designed to look like space.
It does not look like space. It's basically a big circle, and those 6 different sectors I've talked about are in a ring.
Kind of looks like Trivial Pursuit.
Yeah, the gates are in the middle, and then, sort of flaring out from each gates as spokes are these 3 planets.
Yeah, but it's also not all connected. There are sort of these walls put up in certain areas that make certain sectors safer than others,
right?
And certain areas safer than others. And also the resources are not always evenly distributed around the map. Because the map is going to be broken up at the beginning of the game and certain sections will be blocked out, that means that some planets will appear less often than others. There will be less building slots in certain planets, and that also will sort of shift the economy of the game.
Right. And you're going to be on this map in sort of a random place based on this setup card that you'll draw at the beginning of the game. And that's going to tell you, you're starting on a fuel planet, which is maybe going to let you tax more fuel, which will allow you to move more. And, a psionic planet or whatever the case may be. And that is going to greatly change the way you play the game, where you start, and also where you start relative to other players.
And how do we move on this board? Are we just, we spend 1 movement pip and we can move 1 adjacent space over?
Not if you have a starport. You can what's called catapult move. And this is like my favorite part of the map design and movement design is you can basically get anywhere because you can fast travel through these gates to any planet if you're leaving from a starport, unless you are blockaded by control, like ownership of one of these gates. So what it means is anything can be next to each other, basically, given a certain circumstance, or everything can be locked down if there's a lot of ships on the map. So it's really, again, it's very player dependent. It's very game dependent about how the adjacencies of the map is determined.
I think this movement rule around catapulting is really what makes this feel like a space game, because we're not moving across, troops across a map from one place to the next. I can jump all the way around the solar system, provided no one's going to get in my way to get to these other planets, way, way across the map. And even when you compare it to something like Eclipse or TI, those games could easily be on a land map. I mean, there are warp points or whatever. But aside from that, you're moving from tile to tile.
Right.
It could just as easily be an island to another island. But here, no. Like you can, the distance you can travel is based on, this idea of like, light speed travel, like fast
Catapulting,
travel.
yeah,
Exactly.
like using the propulsion of a planet's gravity to fire you out.
Right.
And yeah, what's interesting is so you can be really good at playing the cards and collecting the resources and making sure you score the right things. But if somebody else has done a good job of controlling the map, they can get anywhere. And you have now not prepared for that because you spent all your energy doing other things. And what is the risk exactly of leaving yourself open to basically anybody entering your area where you maybe have a city or a starport and not protecting it? What is the actual conflict? What's at stake in these conflicts, and what can cause you to be on the wrong side of them?
It's a few different things. Both the resources and the cards that you gain through this game will have a cost to steal. So in essence, it's kind of a piracy game in that you can go around and take things from other players. There is a downside built into the combat with this. But like we said earlier, once the resources are gone, you have to find them somewhere. And often that is just going into someone's territory and taking it from them.
Right. You need to be on someone's planet, right, where they have a building in order to steal from them.
Right.
So people will set up blockades to try and protect their areas from being traveled into, and you'll try and circumvent them in order to, sort of appear above the planet in space and then raid that planet.
And two of the victory conditions, Warlord and then to a lesser degree Tyrant, are basically about conflict with other players. So Warlord is taking trophies, which is any pieces that are removed in combat. So the only way to get that is through combat.
Go murder your friends.
You have to go fight. Yeah.
And so this concept of stealing, what can't be stolen? Is there anything that can't be stolen in this game? What is safe?
Well, your ships can be destroyed but not stolen. Same is true of your buildings. And we'll get into this later, and there are some lore cards and leader cards that might give you some faction asymmetries. Those can't be stolen. But everything else, resources, cards, can all be stolen.
Everything that scores can basically be stolen for the most part.
Yeah. Well, not the trophies that you kill in battle, but all the resources that score can be stolen.
Right. So if I'm a player who I don't really want to just produce goods and collect cards and play the card game too well and declare ambitions, I could just wait for someone else to declare the ambition and then just go take all the things they were going to use to score it.
Right.
Well, that sounds like there's going to be a lot of conflict in this game.
It's a very mean game. It's a very mean game.
And we will talk more later about the not feel good moments of ARX. Yeah, we're getting close to the end of discussing sort of what the game is. Lastly, let's just briefly talk about the court. Jordan, you want to tell us what the court is?
Sure. So the court is a deck of cards that have sort of the game's characters and special abilities on them. There'll be 4 out at any given time. There are 2 types of cards in the court. There are guild cards, which are these characters you recruit to your team that have special abilities, and they have a suit with an icon that lets you score. So for instance, if we're scoring psionics, you might have a psionic icon on that card that counts towards your psionic scoring. And they'll have keys so they can be stolen, just like resources. The other type of cards in the court deck are Vox cards, which are one-time abilities. When you get this card, just do it and discard it. And the way you get these cards is you take influence actions to put these little meeples on these court cards, and then you can take secure actions.
They're called agents, right?
They're called agents, that's right. And then you can take secure actions, which are actions that let you claim a card that you have the most agents on.
Right.
And any opposing agents on that card are taken as captives, and captives score with the tyrant condition. So that's
so
sort
dangerous
of
to put some guys out on cards. So you may see, you have a court of cards, which are like 4 face-up cards, sort of pack style a little bit, where you've got these cards that everybody has access to and everybody can see. And you have to place your guys out as an action saying, I want this. I don't have it, but I want it.
Right.
But you're also risking because somebody else can come in and go, I want it more. And now all the guys you put on there that you wanted to win it with are now actually gone and potentially scoring somebody else points.
Right.
So not only did you not get the card, but you gave them the potential of winning the tyrant condition.
And the reason the system works so well is because the action that lets you influence the court and the action that lets you secure a card from the court are on different cards.
Never on the same card.
Never on the same card. So there are resource combos that you can do to, influence a card and then take it immediately. But outside of those combos, which are extremely powerful, you have to leave your guys out there until you're ready to claim the card. And in between, someone can come in and say, no, that will be mine instead. Thank you.
Yeah, and all your guys are now my captives.
Right, and scoring for my condition.
Just feels bad on an emotional level. Just like they're captives? What are you doing to them?
Right.
It's horrible.
Right. And there's one card in the game that lets you execute them and turn them into trophies.
Which is a hilarious and dark card. Let's talk about the space theme. So is this a 4X?
No. There's no exploration. Well,
Right.
we shouldn't even talk about it that way. It's just not a 4X.
It's not a 4X. But I think a lot of people assume it is because
Right.
it looks like there's spaceships, there's
The box.
planets, the box looks like it, there's resources, there's fighting. I see dice.
Right.
Right. Not a 4X though, right?
Not at all.
Not
I think base arcs.
exploit is the only X that it has because you can tax a planet. You can exploit a planet.
Exterminate your enemies. Is that a thing? Is that a 4X
Sure.
thing? Yeah.
You can
Yeah,
sort of
you're not
exterminate
building
them.
up in your own corner.
I get 'em back.
And
Right.
yeah, you're not building up in your own corner, slowly expanding towards the center of
It's
the
not
map.
a turtle game.
It's closer to like a dudes on a map game.
There's no tech tree.
Yeah, like Innis, Kemet, all those kind of conflict-based games that use a map, but you're not building up like a civilization and abilities and things like that.
Yeah, Kemet's a good comparison point because in Kemet, you might be fighting right away,
Mm-hmm.
right? There's no time to build up. It's just, in order to score points, I need to fight, and I'll do that as fast as I can. And, in something like TI or Eclipse, there's going to be like 2 hours where I'm just building up my little systems, building more ships, getting ready, and then we're going to fight at the end of the game.
Kemet,
Not so here.
Kemet is the best comp I've heard for it. You're right. It is a lot like Kemet in the sense that when I used to teach Kemet, I'd always be like, okay, this is not a turtle game. This is a pick your time to kill and pick your time to die game. And that's very similar to Arcs is. It's like you're going to die and you're going to kill. The only thing you can decide is when you're doing those, hopefully,
Right.
and doing them at better times than when your opponents are doing them. Because in every game of Arcs, you're going to be at the top of the mountain and then you're going to be at the bottom of the pile. And I've never had a game where I wasn't both by the end.
Yeah. I will say I think Arcs might have a slightly wider space because you can have certain games where there's little to no conflict, and you can have games where there's massive amounts of conflict. But
it's on the table.
it's on the table from turn one.
From
right.
turn one, you have to be thinking about it. And unlike TI, like in Twilight Imperium 4, I'm not worried about getting wiped off the map on turn one. That's not possible. But it's very possible in Arcs. It is extremely possible. All right, so that's the basics. You now know everything that makes Arcs special. You now know all the things it does that are exceptional or interesting or different. The last big important thing about this game is it's not just one game. It's not just a box, learn the rules, and play it. There are multiple modes of play for Arcs. There is basically the base game, which we just taught. Not taught, but told you about. That's going to be in every version of Arcs, all the things we just talked about. But then there's also what's called Leaders and Lores, which is the version of the game where you draft asymmetrical powers. You draft a leader and you draft a lore card. A lore card is sort of like a court card that can never be stolen.
Right.
It's yours forever, and it's going to give you a rule-breaking power. Then you're going to have a leader, which you're going to draft as well at the beginning of the game. And that leader is going to define your game. It's going to give you a huge rule-breaking power. But in addition to a rule-breaking power, it's going to give you a downside as well, something that you are not good at. So everybody doesn't just get stronger. You get stronger in one area, but weaker in another. Now, one thing that everybody can do, you can't do. But one thing nobody can do, you can. And you're going to draft those at the beginning in combination with lore cards, which could make some really fun and exciting combos. And then you're going to play the game we just described, but with those rule-changing powers. And there are 16 leaders and 16 lore cards.
28 lore cards.
28 lore cards, sorry. If you have the Leaders and Lore expansion pack, which is just double the amount of leaders and lore that comes in the base game. And that is a lot of content just right there because every game is going to be different. And the leaders are going to drastically change the way that you play the game.
Drastically. And I think they also give you a little bit more than just their, pro power and negative power. They also tell you which two resources you're going to start with.
Right.
And what sort of, ships, cities, and star bases you're going to start with.
They tell you your starting resources and where you are in them. They put out all your quote unquote dudes on the map.
Right. Which might sound small, it is not. I think the starting resources can be very impactful.
Maybe even more impactful than the leader sometimes.
Maybe.
Absolutely.
Yeah, if you're coming from like a root background, you're looking for that asymmetry, definitely leaders and lore is like going to be the sweet spot for you to kind of jump into, I think. The base game is quite good, and the asymmetry develops through the court cards mostly. But just having that like sort of faction ability, being like, wow, I can do this, or I have this sort of combo that I can do from turn one, I think is exciting.
Yeah, the base game is actually, I think, like a little tighter and a little meaner because we're all trying to do the same thing and we're all starting with the same stuff. Absolutely. Whereas in Leaders and Lore, someone might have a leader that's trying to do something different. You're not trying to do that, so you're not going to get in each other's way over that issue, you know?
I've actually never played the base game.
Oh, really?
I went right to Leaders and Lore, and I've never looked back. I would happily play the base game. The more I play this game, the more I'm like, no, the base game's pretty good. Like in terms of like, I actually think it would help improve my chops in certain areas. Like this is one of those games where I'm thinking about reps, not just as fun reps, but as like I'm needing to work. It's exactly how I think about Agricola. Like I love playing Agricola, but I'm also playing it knowing that I'm leveling up my abilities at Agricola. And I feel like it has such a high skill ceiling, and Arcs I think has a very high skill ceiling that I'm always amazed at how bad I am every time I sit down to play the game and how much I improve, and then sit down the next game and realize how bad I still am at this game, but I'm learning. But I would destroy myself in my first game if I played him right now in some weird alternate timeline where I could play a doppelganger of myself. Like totally. I'm still getting so much better, but I have so much left to learn.
Yeah.
All right. And then there is this little campaign module that it comes with. It comes with just a couple of cards, and you can just put it. No, it comes with a coffin-sized box of like 500 cards. This is why I think the game is getting all this attention right now.
For sure.
Look, if Leaders and Lore came out and the base game came out, we're at a pretty similar level of hype here. But I think it's gone in like 6 months. This campaign is what I think is going to, and I'm saying it right now, put it into the top 3 in BGG. I think it will be a top 3 game on BGG eventually. I think you give it 2 years. And also keep it a game we're playing in 10 years. The campaign is the most ridiculous expansion for any game ever made, in that like so much effort was put into it. There is so much content. There are, I'm not exaggerating, 500 hours worth of game in there that still you'll be scratching the surface on many parts of it.
Seeing new things, new combos.
It's an insane level of content. So what is it? Well, at its basicness, it is a way to string together 3 games of Arcs. And that will then give you a campaign of those 3 games. When you're done with that, it's done. There is no legacy element. It's not like Oath. It's not going to carry on forever. I'm not going to make a choice or rip up a card or do something that's going to then change the game forever. Nope. We played 3 games back to back, or break it up at game night and pull it out next week and finish it. And then that campaign is a story. Like that is like 1 game of TI4. We played that. That was an experience. It's done. And that to me is an important thing, because while legacy games were hot and cool for the moment, I think they have shown their weakness in that it is really difficult to get the same people together. And if you're not getting the same people together, nobody cares. Nobody cares about what I did in Oath 3 weeks ago if they've never played the game before. They're like, I don't know what that is. Like, wonderful game if you're on a desert island with 4 people and that's all the game you play, but so hard to actually see the incredibleness of that design and what it can do in the reality that we live in, where it's hard to get the same group of people together and wanting to play the same game every week.
Right.
But in this game, no legacy. It's just 3 game nights or 1 game day, and you tell an amazing story. So, Jordan, why don't you tell us a little bit about how the campaign works and where it is different from Leaders and Lore, the base game?
Sure. So instead of the Leaders and Lore that you draft in the base game, you're going to get a fate. You'll get a choice of 2 at the beginning of the first game. These will be A fates. And they're going to have both some, special abilities, cards you'll get to start the game with, different components they're going to add into the game that are going to be massive rule changers.
Kind of like Leaders a little bit.
More than Leaders. Like, for instance, maybe a whole new suit of cards that you're going to be trying to add to the action deck.
Wow.
Or, some other massive change. And then you're going to have a goal certain things you can accomplish to tick down this little time marker that's going to sit on the score track and start at a specified position, maybe something like 18, for example. And every time you do one of these 2 or 3 things that are on your card, you're going to advance that down to 0.
So that ticks down.
But
you're still getting points in the normal way, and that ticks up.
Right. Still scoring ambition points. And at the end of the scenario, or at the end of the game, if you ticked your timer all the way down to 0, you've succeeded at your fate. And going into game 2...
It's like having a mission.
Right. It's a mission. Right. And going into game 2, if you succeeded, you can either stick with that fate or change to a B fate. B fates are fates that come in game 2. If you didn't succeed, you're out, go home. No, you get to draw 2 of the B fates that start in Act 2.
But most importantly, you can't continue with that faction.
Right. You failed that mission. You
failed
must
the mission.
change what you're doing.
That faction, they died. They were murdered.
They died, but there are still going to be impacts felt for the rest of the game for what they were trying to do. For instance, maybe you needed to add, 6 cards from this new suit into the game and you only did 4. Okay, you can't be the faction that adds those cards into the game, but those 4 cards you added into the deck, those are still there for the rest
of the game.
Right.
Your corpse pieces are just lying around, and we step on you, and we get your goo on our feet, and we remember that you were there once.
Exactly.
But you are no longer a factor in the game outside of that.
Right. But then you're going to pivot into a B fate and start from there. And the same thing's going to happen at the end of game 2. Either you'll stick with your A or B fate if you succeeded, or you could pivot if you want to, or if you failed, you must pivot to a C fate. And the C fates, just like the A and B fates, are going to have a timer that ticks down. And if they make it to 0 in game 3, they just win at the end of that round. The other fates, the A and B fates, they don't have timers anymore. Now they just have other ways to score more points. So they
a lot of points.
A lot of points. So they must stop the C fates from ticking their timers all the way down to 0 while also getting the most points to win the game.
So let me paint a picture here really quick. So think of this as a video game, and you pick, let's say it's Street Fighter, okay? All right, so you pick Chun-Li because she's the best, obviously, best character in the game. You pick Chun-Li, and you're told a mission. You have to pull off an awesome combo in this game. Okay, so now I'm fighting, I win and I pull off my awesome combo. Or maybe I don't even win, but I somehow pull off this awesome combo. Now I go on to round 2 of the fight. I'm allowed to stick with Chun-Li. And Chun-Li now is getting a little bit better because of that last one. Like, she's got some new moves, she's got some new things. And now if I win with her again in the final boss fight, I can have her fully formed version that is maybe even more powerful than any other character in the game. And now all I have to do is win. But hopefully I'm so strong because of all these times I've won and gotten better that I can win. Or I fail at Chun-Li's thing in the beginning. Chun-Li is no longer a character I can play with. She's dead. People remember some of her cool moves, and now I can switch to a new character.
Right.
That's sort of how it feels. It's like, you can keep going with this one character and they're going to get stronger and they're going to get better and they're going to be awesome. Or you can just switch to another character, or if you failed at it, or if you just are bored of playing that character, switch to another one. And you're not starting over because the B fates are starting a little bit stronger than the A fates, and the C fates are starting not stronger, but with a instant win ability because they've missed out on the opportunity to get stronger for 2 rounds or for 2 games. And now instead of that, they start off a little weaker than everybody, but they have a chance to just straight up end the game and win the whole campaign.
Right. And it's not, oh, go ahead.
I think it's worth mentioning how thematic that these fates are. They bring so much story to the game. So just having an admiral in the first game means your galactic empire is going to grow, and that's going to change the board and the rest of the campaign. So it's not just, I'm playing with this one ability, I get to kind of level it up. It's like, it's really evolving the entire game, and the game really feels alive as you're playing through the campaign.
That's exactly what I was going to say. It's not just that you're getting stronger, it's that you're telling this story like, oh, I was the admiral, I put together this armada, or oh, I was the believer, I disseminated this faith, across the reach. And even though I didn't reach enough people to, convert the entire, world to this faith, there are still going to be remnants of my cult throughout the rest of the game. Things like that.
Yeah, but Eurogamers are going like, yeah, cool story, great, whatever. Yeah, we make a story, cool. But how important is that story? Like, how hard is it to ignore the story, and how much better is the game because of the story? Like, how much is, like, a lot of Eurogamers here, like, it creates this emergent story, and they just go like, okay, cool. Are the mechanics cool?
How hard is it to ignore the story is an interesting question.
Well, how much does the story get in your face? How much does it become the main meal and not just a side dish?
I would say I think it's medium. I think if you just play hand after hand and you're just thinking tactically about how to achieve goals and get points, you might do that and you wouldn't think as much about the story. But if you take a minute after each hand and think, okay, what happened here? What's the story of this hand? Oh, we all built a bunch of ships and we've, there was a battle over here and I was battling in order to expand my fleet or in order to do this goal. Then the story really comes out. But you have to take 30 seconds to think about it.
Right. Yeah. Or even, what was interesting to me was that I'm not a story forward gamer at all. I don't look for it. It's not something I seek out in games. But it is, to me, so hard to ignore in this game and so fun, but also like not complicated. It's not like it's telling this grand RPG story that, blah, blah. It's like, okay, I'm the Empire sycophants, and I just snivel at the feet of the Empire, and I'm trying. You instantly start LARPing that character, or I'm the outlaw rebel who hates the government. By the way, there's a whole government aspect of the campaign, which we didn't mention, where there's a ruler and we're all in the government at the beginning, but you can leave and become an outlaw. So you start the game with you want to be an outlaw as soon as possible, and you just want to annoy the hell out of the Empire. And you are mechanically now forced into telling that story. And it's not only does it help you play the game, because that's now what you're going to need to do to win, but you have to start LARPing as that character in order to succeed, even if you don't really want to. Like, your actions are LARPing that character.
Yeah, it's telling a cinematic story that starts from the very beginning of the game. It doesn't have to build up for 2 hours to have some climactic battle. Like, you can just have a story of, I'm leaving the Empire immediately. I'm going to start this colony out in the far reaches of space.
Yeah.
It just has that.
And it gives you these sort of archetypal characters that exist in these space stories. Like, I was just the merchant. I don't care about your war. I don't care about the rebels. I'm just here to sell stuff. Like, I'm just the guy looking to make a buck. Like, and you just instantly and you're playing a different game. Or you're just or you know what? I'm the virus. Hi, everybody. I could be a nice virus or I could be a bad virus. What kind of virus am I in the universe? Or I'm the murder people. I am here to kill you all. And you just instantly put in these fun sort of Star Trek factions that you instantly know what they mean.
Right. And it's all mechanical.
Yeah,
right?
It's all
That's
mechanical.
What's so impressive is all the storytelling is mechanical. There's no flavor text or very, very little flavor text in the game. Yeah. And the other thing that's great about it is, even though there are these 24 fates that each have their own name and their own sort of story associated with them, they're never going to get old, because the story they tell is going to be different depending on the game
depending on the other factions that are in the game.
Right. For instance, there's this faction called the Pathfinder that Drew played in a recent game, and their goal is to, find these refugees and bring them through a portal. But the story we told in our game was, oh no, Drew's starting a cult and he's sending those people off to their deaths through this portal, right? And that story was still valid and still there through the mechanics, That's
the fun. It's not a complicated story, and it emerges so naturally. And also okay. So in between games, they call it an intermission, which is an important word they've used here, because we are telling a story. A 3-act play is happening here. And during the intermission, there's all these awesome things happening behind the curtain. And when the curtain goes up on the next time, a new story is going to change. So the fact that you can decide if you've passed your mission to stay with that person or shift is done secretly. We all pick silently what we're doing and then reveal. And the curtain goes up on Act 2, and it's oh, those merchants that were big sellers last round and doing so well, and you guys were, they actually died. They all sort of were killed by some sort of a virus, and they were reborn as alien spore that are going to now conquer the galaxy. Yeah. But all the special merchant cards that were there are still in it, so we remember this person, but the story is now they were infected by this alien virus and are now, turned into their malevolent form. And it's impossible not to start telling those stories.
It's almost as if like between each games of a campaign, you see a Star Wars crawl, a text crawl, like, oh, this is where we're catching up with this faction, or maybe we've forgotten about, this group, but now we're focusing on this conflict. And yeah, it's
absolutely
so good.
Like, oh, that religious leader who was not able to, convert the Reach to his faith or whatever, is going behind closed doors. He's licking his wounds, and now he's a genocidal maniac.
Yeah, exactly.
And
it's really funny without feeling slight or silly.
Right.
It is silly, but it's silly in a cool way, not like in a way where you emotionally disconnect, but in a way where you're like, this is hilarious and it's gonna be such a fun. And honestly, like, it does a really great thing wherein by the third round, I found that everybody's rooting not for who's going to win. Obviously, we're all trying to win, but you're kind of also rooting for the best end of the story. Mm-hmm. And maybe the end of the story is that you didn't win. And and that really helps salve the wounds of losing the campaign if, the story built in such a way that the ending is so perfect, and like obviously it had to end with the space portal opening and incoming the monster, and it's like that's just the perfect ending to this. Like, the Empire died in the best way, and
right.
It just becomes it really makes it an experience that you'll remember forever just off of one game. And so, how long do you think it takes to do a whole campaign?
I think we settled at around 2 hours per player.
2 hours per player, right?
Which you're going to do with likely 3 to 4 players, so 6 or 8 hours.
6 to 8 hours. So it's a day. Now, we did a game night campaign with 3 players starting at 6 o'clock, and we finished at midnight. Now, this is you, me, and Drew. It was 3 experienced players who had needed no help, no teach, knew exactly what they were doing. It wasn't even their first campaign. And so, yeah, that's totally doable. 6 hours is a game night. You're starting at dinner and going to midnight, but it's doable.
Right.
4 players is not a game night. Unless you're going to go till 3 or 4 in the morning or something, or start, but 4 players is a day. It's 10 a.m. till 6 p.m.
But you can also play over the course of 3 game nights, and the storage solution for porting over what happened in each play is very good. Incredible. And very
That's
smart. Yeah,
so important. The insert to this game is not just a wonderful helper. It is actually what makes the campaign possible outside of game days or very long game nights, because it is so easy. They made it so fast and easy to put the game away exactly where you left it. You can't do it in the middle of a game. You have to at least finish the game of the 3 games of the campaign. And it goes away and comes out so fast. The setup is so easy how it all goes away and comes back.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's like 2 minutes.
Yeah, like if somebody told me, hey, we made Twilight Imperium 4, but it takes like 14 hours to play. Yeah, we made it so that every 2.5 hours you can just pause it and set it up exactly where you were in 30 seconds. I'd be like, oh, I'll buy that. Yeah. Like, I will have that game. So that's the campaign in a nutshell. Obviously, there are so many different factions, so many different ways it can play. Somebody did the math. It's over a couple billion in terms of the different variations of the game going from A to C.
Yeah.
And we should say those are, go ahead.
I think Cole has used the word seeds, and he's specifically mentioned playing a lot of roguelike video games where you don't know exactly what combination of cards, of abilities that you're going to get throughout a run. So a campaign is sort of like a run of a roguelike game where there's like millions, billions of seeds, you might get these different combinations. So
I bet, and what'd be awesome is people might start finding really fun seeds.
That's interesting.
Like really cool patterns.
Yeah. I think it's important to note that those seeds aren't just a little different. It's not like, well, I started on hex A instead of hex B. It's like, okay, we have these 3 or 4 different factions in the game. They're going to interact in a very different way. 2 of them are going to go away and leave their impact. 2 of them are going to move on. We've got these new 2 factions coming in. They're all going to interact in like a unique and interesting way. I think that adds a lot of value. It's not just, it's a little different. It's like, no, this is massively different.
So I mentioned Twilight Imperium 4 a second ago, and I think it is important to talk about the comparisons to it. So this has been called the TI4 killer. This has been called the game that replaces TI4, or just another version of TI4. I definitely was thinking when it was before it was coming that it would be in that similar space, like of a whole day. It takes the game day, and it's something we do a couple times a year. let's first of all talk about how, if it is similar to TI4 or not, if the comparison is apt, and then how it plays differently and why that comparison may or may not be accurate at all.
Okay.
We're all TI4 players here, right? The three of us.
Me to a less degree. I've only played one time.
Oh, okay.
And it was all with kind of newer players. Very, very long day.
Yeah.
I did enjoy the experience. I would definitely play it again.
Yeah.
And I'm more drawn to sort of the event style. We're gonna, have politics. We're gonna vote on stuff. That was my favorite part of TI. And I think the other aspects, the space battles, got a little too in the weeds of all the rules and stuff. But maybe as more plays, I would kind of click with that more.
Jordan, how many times have you played TI4?
I don't know, 5.
Okay.
About 5 to, probably around 5. Maybe a little more, maybe 6 or 7. What about you?
I've just played a couple times, but I adore it. I played it last week. It took 14 hours. And I'm glad I played it last week because I had also played ARX about 6 times that week. And then that long week of ARX ended with a full day TI4 game. And I can confidently say they have nothing to do with each other. I don't feel they step on each other's toes at all. I don't feel like outside of the space theme and the fact that they create epic stories, I don't think there's any comparison. They didn't feel mechanically similar to me at all. They didn't scratch the same itch in any way, shape, or form. The only thing that was similar was that the next day I was still thinking about the story we told and the mechanics that we enjoyed and the interactions that we had at the table. Those are the only things that were similar to me.
I would say that the negotiation that Drew described is also present in ARX in a sort of different way and maybe a slightly lesser degree, but arguing over who's going to take this resource, take this planet, score these points, do whatever. That part you can kind of see across both games, but and the storytelling that you told. But right, the mechanics are quite different.
Yeah, and just just at a scope level, TI4 is about a civilization. You are an entire species, an entire civilization, an entire planet of beings who have a singular goal, and everybody has the same goal, which is to get 10 points. In ARX, you're not a civilization. You're like 4 people.
Right.
You're maybe not even the same race or the same. It's much more of a space opera as opposed to Star Trek or a Civ game or a 4X. It's like,
you're a character in a trilogy.
Exactly.
Sci-fi trilogy.
That's it. You're a couple scrappy people, or maybe just one person with a weird agenda trying to make something happen, and you might fail, and then you're going to pass the baton on to another couple weird people who are going to sort of push the ball up the hill. It's just, and that moves on to mechanics as well. You are not turtling. You are not building up forces. You are not chasing a tech tree. Well, I have to get this tech out, and then I can upgrade my ship, and then I can upgrade this other thing, and then I build this impressive force, and then we all fight to get to the middle of the board, and we have a huge battle, and whoever wins that is going to get a certain amount of points, and maybe they win the game. This is just structurally not that at all.
Right. This time scale of the story is a good way to look at it too, right? An ARX campaign is maybe 10 to 20 years in theory. A game of TI is probably 100 years or more that you're covering as you're conquering these planets.
Yeah. I mean, and just in general, like you're not doing the same things, and it doesn't feel the same at all. I mean, just outside of the fact that, like, imagine putting a trick-taking game on TI4, but it's just a very different experience to me. That I disagree entirely that one kills the other. The only thing it might kill is if you're only going to play ARX as an all-day affair, and you only have 1 or 2 all-day affairs in your gaming life in a year, and TI4 is one of them. Yes, they may step on each other's toes in terms of but you don't have to play ARX as an all-day affair. In fact, I don't know if I ever will. It seems a lot easier. I mean, no, I will, but I'm also just happy to start it at any game night. Any game night, you can start it.
Right.
You don't have to wait for a special occasion. It's game night. All right, let's do an ARX campaign. Or, hey, remember that ARX campaign that we are one into? Let's bring that back to the table this week.
Right. It's also a good deal shorter. I mean, a campaign of ARX is probably about half as long as a campaign of TI.
Yeah.
And with fewer players. I think the feel of the game being different is a good opportunity to highlight just how tactical ARX can be versus TI4, which is very, long form strategic as you're moving across the map and taking planets. In Arcs, the name of the game is adaptability, right? You are going to get this hand of cards and you're going to have to figure out how to make it work for you. And that might mean you can continue forward with your plan, full speed. It might mean, I need to take a few card plays off to, try and capitalize on this opportunity to do something different. It's not that there's no strategy or long-term strategy, but there's much more of a tactical feel. Whereas in TI4, sometimes you're sitting there and you're thinking, okay, I know my next 6 turns. I'm going to take this planet. I'm going to develop this technology. Then I'm going to activate my, ability card and, whatever. That can't be true in Arcs, right? You can't know your next 6 turns. You only have 6 cards in your hand at a time, right. Max,
Yeah. So, I mean, I think the Kemet comparison is actually the closest I've gotten to anybody I've heard has gotten to like being able to really nail sort of the strategic feel of, sort of a base game of Arcs. Obviously that doesn't touch at all on the campaign aspect of it or even leaders and lore, but yeah, that is a good comparison and feels interesting to me in terms of like what people should expect about that. So speaking of expectations, before we get into our final thoughts, I want to talk about what our journeys have been with this game so far. And I feel like I've had quite a journey with it. So one of my special superpowers as a human being is able to back a Kickstarter and then completely forget about it until the day it arrives on my doorstep. I actually don't like learning about games before they arrive. Okay, what if I want it? Like, that's going to suck. I'd rather just not forget it exists. So I was excited for Arcs because I was hearing the hype bubbling. And everybody was like, oh no, this is really good. And that was very exciting for me. So I did learn the rules and stuff a couple of weeks before it came, but only a couple of weeks. And I didn't play it on TTS at all. And when it showed up, we had a game day at Candace's, and I got to play it for the first time with leaders and lore, and I found it really frustrating. It did not give me a great first game experience. Now, I had already read the rules. I was already very excited about the campaign. I knew I was going to try it at least 5 more times probably, but I found the first experience challenging as a Euro gamer. Now, as a Euro gamer, I expect certain things out of the games that I love, which is a certain level of control, a certain level of ability to plan my turns, the idea that what I have some ownership over, and that this is a game that I can understand how to get better at. I got none of that in my first game. I felt like I got a hand of bullshit cards that I couldn't do anything with, that weren't how I wanted to play the game, that were the opposite of what my leader told me to be doing. I felt like I had no idea how to even improve at the game at the end of it. I felt like it sucked. Like, what's the point of building up stuff if it's just going to make people come and steal it from me? I found it frustrating. I found it like actually just not very fun. I was just like, I don't have control. I feel like really weak. And I didn't like those feelings. Mm-hmm. Like, so it instantly, I had a different idea of what it was going to be than what I thought. And that I'm not used to having that lack of control and what felt like just a chaos bomb to me. It felt like chaos bomb. Like after the first game, I was like, this is just chaos. Like there's like, okay, there may be a cool story here, but it's fucking chaos. Like there's the Euro player in me is like, nah, like not my jam.
Right. And there are a ton of reviews on BGG of people who have played 1 to maybe max 3 times probably with this exact sentiment.
Absolutely.
Right.
And I completely understand and relate. Let's jump ahead to my next 5 or 6 games of it over the next week or so. When I got rid of those expectations and I started to realize how wrong I was, how much control I can actually have over it. It's just in a way that I was not assuming it would come from at the beginning, and B, gave me a different way of sort of thinking about overall strategy in general. This is not a game where you want to make it clear to the rest of the table how you're going to win, and B, do the things necessary to win that way, because you won't. This is a game, at least at the beginning, of not specializing, but of being good enough at everything that you can pivot and finding the skill level in being able to keep sort of a null state board with everybody else and wait for the perfect opportunities of when to strike. This is a game about timing, and there is strategy in timing. There is, your actions are tactical, but deciding when you're going to make those moves and when you're going to build up and when you're going to slow down and when you're going to speed up is strategy, and a huge, huge skill level to this game. The more I played, the more I realized how much better I could get at this system and how actually there is a lot more control than I felt at first. And those things are not present to somebody with 15 years of Eurogaming experience. I did not see those on my first few turns. I had not played a game that felt like a chaos bomb that then ended up being like, I actually think there's very little chaos in this game. Like, okay, campaigns, absolutely a ton of chaos. That's different though. You're in it for that to a certain extent. But in base game or leaders and lore, like, no, the best player is going to win 10 out of 10 times. I genuinely believe that.
I would say maybe like 8 out of 10 times. There is some chaos. There's dice rolling, like that stuff's in there. But I agree with you. There's a ton of strategy. Yeah.
Drew, so that was my sort of overall experience of the game. And now I'm just, once I played the campaign for the first time, I was just like, oh, I'm going to want to play this for a decade. Yeah, I'm in love. So Drew, what was your Jordan, your first instincts, and has it changed at all?
Yeah. So like Drew, I played, when the Kickstarter first launched, it was a very different game. And then I backed it, trusting that it would be good, but forgot about it until a few months ago. Then Drew started playing on TTS. I think you started before me. And then I sort of joined in on the TTS games. We played a few. We played, 5 games on TTS. And then we played 2 campaigns on TTS, a 3-player campaign and a 2-player campaign. Then the game delivered, and we've played a number of campaigns. I've played base game. I've played with leaders and lore, played it all. When we first jumped back in on TTS, a few months ago, I also had some frustrating experiences with navigating the game because I couldn't do what I wanted to do. And I had to sort of reframe how I was thinking about the game. And I was getting crushed. So, that's also disheartening. But like Matt, the more I've played, the more I've seen how to play the game well, the more I've seen, just different ways to think about how to manage your hand. And there are I feel like almost every time I play the game, I'm seeing something completely new, a new strategy, a new thing to think about. And I think that space is almost endlessly explorable, especially when you add in leaders and lore and campaign and all these different things. So I'm in a place where I think the game is super fun, very thematic, tells a great story, and it's extremely mechanically engaging. And one of the best feelings is picking up a hand of cards. Your first thought is, oh shit, this hand sucks. And then your next thought is,
right, that's every the hand most important lesson to learn. Every hand sucks.
And then, okay, how am I going to play this out? And I almost think of it like, instead of how many games of Arcs have I played, how many hands of Arcs have I played? Because each hand is its own learning experience.
Yeah.
And I can't wait to keep playing.
Where did you start with it, and where are you at now in comparison?
So I mentioned I played the Kickstarter version, and it's funny that you're saying that your first play of the game was like frustrating, because I remember the Kickstarter version was even more difficult to do anything, because there were rules changes with like how resources worked. Like you had to spend resources just to build ships and build buildings, where now those are just actions that you just do the thing. So it's like it's removed a lot of that of that resistance. I guess.
Every time you played a card, you drafted a card for your next hand.
Yeah,
which is crazy. Anyway.
Yeah. So started there, and then when I started playing earlier this year on Tabletop Simulator, joined the Discord community, the Woodland Warriors, and started watching a lot of content out there for Arcs. There was a tournament actually going on for, I think they were playing both base and leaders and lore.
Like a pre-release
tournament, which is crazy. That
was one of the first moments I realized, like, oh, this game might have some cool legs if there's actually tournament play even before it comes out.
Totally. Yeah. So much like strategy there.
Tier lists.
Yeah. And this game is basically, it was designed for a player like me. Like I thrive with games that, both involve cards. I love card-based games, but especially like hand management. Like on my Mount Rushmore of games, Twilight Struggle, Agricola, 2 games that are driven by cards, card play.
As much interaction as games could possibly have.
And timing. I love timing in games. I love setting yourself. Too. Yeah, Netrunner for sure. Setting yourself up for big plays at a specific moment, and how you manage that is just like my favorite thing.
Creativity in a lot of ways too, or player agency. It's like these games. Yeah, it's really like how a system in which you can express yourself with like like strict parameters and rules, but like a lot of room for creativity and expression. That's exactly what Arcs is, and Agricola. I think that's part of the reason why I've enjoyed it a lot, is like it does that thing that so few games do, where it's like, I really look for competitive experiences in games. Like for me to fall in love with a game, it's a game that I feel that I can be improving at forever. And a part of that means there will be a competitive scene for that game, or else how am I testing myself, right? It can't just be against my own meta forever. Which is why I became so addicted to Agricola. It's not just because I love the game so much, but because there was such an active, thriving, talented group of players out there willing to just keep forcing each other to get better. And the fact that Arcs had a tournament before the game even came out was like, oh, if this game has that level of competitiveness in it, that is something that I'm willing to invest more energy and time into, because I really enjoy that process of self-improvement within a game. And my first instinct with Arcs was, I don't see how this is competitive. Like it's just, but like the more I play it, that's what's exciting to me. Is like, this game is crazy competitive. Like, and there is a high skill ceiling. And like, I genuinely think there will be a great tournament scene for Leaders in Lore, not for the campaign. Which, you know, they've even mentioned possibly doing campaign tournaments. And I think that's just wild, but also would be very entertaining to watch. Yeah. But
there are TI4 tournaments, right? Like, it's not.
No, that's a huge world of TI4. Yeah, but and the campaigns, I think there's a lot. I mean, look, you'd have to know so much to be able to play it strategically in terms of what every possible faction is coming out.
Totally.
Blah blah blah. But the Leaders in Lore version of Arcs is like, no, the best players really gonna go to the top, and that's an exciting prospect for me as somebody who loves playing games competitively, not because I need to win, I don't, but because I really love a game where I can just constantly be getting better at it. That's a feeling I enjoy and chase. All right, so who is this game not for? It's obviously for us. This game we've discussed is something that maybe was designed for us specifically. It feels like that in terms of like trick-taking obsession, and then here comes this game. I'll start with one thing, and then we can go around the horn and talk about things this is a game with a lot of feel-bad moments. And part of the skill ceiling of this game is learning which feel-bad moments actually should be feel-bad moments or not. Like, this is a game where you can get pretty much wiped off the map, but guess what? You could still 100% win the game. Like, you can have such low lows in this game and come back. And a part of that is the way the game ramps up in terms of points. The first 2 rounds of the game, the points are small. But every round, the scoring tiles flip over and get stronger. So by the end of the game, you actually could have no points going into the last round and straight up have a solid chance of winning. Yeah. Like 100%. Like, so understanding the timing of this game, knowing when to strike, knowing when actually a loss is a loss. Like, you could have a lot of board strength or a lot of points, and if you know the game well enough, realize that something that just happened has knocked you out of the game. Like, so you may think you're doing better than you are, and you may think that a loss is a lot worse than it is as you get better at this game. So this is a game that, especially for inexperienced players, I think can lead to a lot of feel-bad moments. You're literally just stealing from each other. I can just, if you're not strong, if you're weak and I'm strong, your resources are as good as mine. But then it's figuring out how to pivot, how to get out of that. That's when the skill ceiling comes in. And then recognizing that, like, you are going to get raided. You are going to have stuff stolen from you. And knowing that in advance makes you feel like you have control.
Right. Oh, you're going to take my resources. I'll spend them all before you can.
Sure. Or, well, guess what? That's not scoring this round. Or I don't care.
Or maneuver the card play so that you'll get the last turn of the 100%. Chapter and you can come back and steal them back.
Right.
Exactly right. So, like, this is a game that can lead to, especially if you're coming into this thinking of it as a 4X or a space game or a quote unquote dudes on a map game, your feelings are going to get hurt by how easily you're destroyed. Like, usually in a game, if I have all my pieces wiped off the map, or 75% of my pieces, that's the end of my game. But it's not in Arcs. It's just, you have to adjust your idea of what a loss looks like and what a win. Even your wins are going to come out of nowhere. Like, we just played a game with Ben for the first time ever.
Right.
He went into the last round with 4 points.
No, he had like 16 points, but he did score the max 34 in a single round, which is enough if he had 0 points to still win the game.
So, like, you know, there is a huge ability for comebacks in this game, which don't appear to be comebacks if you're experienced in the game. You'll anticipate them. You know those are possible. A good example is if you know the Woodland Alliance and Root. They look like they're losing the whole game, and then they win at the last round. And if you've never played the game before, that's a feel bad moment for a lot of people because it's like, well, okay, great, you can just explode for 30 points. Yeah, but okay, after 100 games, you're like, we know how to handle that. We know how to deal with that. And Arcs has a lot of that.
Right. So feel bad moments.
Feel bad moments. What else? What else do you think are some reasons people might not like this game?
I would say rules in general. So a friend of mine who I've played this game with, the campaign in particular, he's called it rules porn because it's constantly just like throwing new things at you. And I think the base game of Arcs is it's compared to like a scaffolding that the whole campaign is built on.
Yeah, it's a system.
And it's a solid system. Like if once you play a few games of base Arcs, you're not going to feel like, oh, there's so many rules. Like it's very slick. It's a great system. As soon as you start adding all of these campaign elements that are a bit more experimental, you're gonna find some conflicts in the rules. You're gonna find some things that don't quite work, maybe as the wording is intended. You're gonna have to look things up.
You have to parse words.
You're going to BGG a few times during the campaign. You are.
So if you're not a fan of that, if you find that frustrating, that now someone can do this crazy ability based on these two cards, then you're not going to have as good a time with the campaign. But if you're someone who finds that exciting, like the emergent story from those abilities, then I think you will enjoy it.
Even Ben pointed out in his first game, he was like, it felt like there was a lot of moments where you're going like, oh, but in fact, there's an exception here where you can't do that. And there's a little edge case here, and I forgot to tell you can't do this. Like, there are a few moments like that. I will say it is the easiest teach of any cool game, I think. I think you can teach the game relatively quickly. Are there a few little edge cases that get annoying? Yes. But also after like 2 or 3 games, I don't think I've looked at the rule book since then. Like I feel like I know every rule in the game pretty well at this point.
I would say I think PAX Pamir is an easier teach, but this is a close second.
Yeah, this is not a 4.5. This is not Oath. This is not John Company. This is a 30-minute teach.
Right. So I think the third category or a third category of people who are not going to enjoy this game are, and we've already touched on this, people who want to feel like they have complete control over their moves. You know, they're going to say, I want to move to that planet and fight and take that resource. And the fact that my hand doesn't let me do that in exactly the order and way that I want to means that this game is like not fun.
Yeah.
I don't have enough control.
Yeah.
And, you know, that's a fine way to feel. And, you know, certain people will feel that way. And that is a valid point. It's true that, you know, you can't always do exactly what you want, exactly how you want to. But if you can get over that feeling and try and find ways to assert your control and find the right moments to do so, you'll still have a really good time.
An important tip I would give to Euro players is the levers of control are not where you think they are.
Right.
And they're not where you expect them. Cole has reinstalled the levers of control in places that are unfamiliar to most heavy Euro gamers, which is novel and interesting, but also like, takes a moment of like shifting. But there are people who are just, it's going to always feel like a chaos bomb to certain people, I think. And that's, you know, those are definitely something to know about yourself. Like if you really don't like, I mean, there's dice rolling. There's just straight up a lot of dice rolling in this game. Now there's 3, we didn't even talk about them. There's 3 different types of dice. They all are completely different in terms of what sides they do, you are choosing how much luck you want in your game. Mm-hmm. And so the designer is giving you that amount, and you can still win and have the minimal amount, and you can win and have the maximal amount. And, you know, it's up to you to decide how much risk you want to take. But there's downsides to taking those risks too.
Right. The way those dice work is, you know, whichever dice have the most positive rewards for you also have the most potential downsides you can roll. Yeah. And then dice that have fewer positive rewards have fewer downsides, and you have to, you know,
they're self-balancing in a sense. Yeah. Right.
Should we touch briefly on king making? That comes up a lot with Cole games.
Absolutely. It's here.
Yeah.
It's back, baby. It's maybe back in the best it's ever been.
It's not Oath, which is the game about king making, but it's certainly still something that you have to think about, especially with the campaign, I would say. More so than the base game.
And I think, so story-wise, you can interweave the king making better in campaign. It does come out in base and leaders and lore. There's definitely times in that last round when the game is clearly between 2 players, and another player does sort of have the ability to decide the winner in a certain way. Now, like any game with king making, the winner, is the one who was maybe the most aware that that situation was going to present itself at some point and has metaed the game in such a way where it to ingratiate themselves with that player in a better way, or, whatever it is. There's many levers of how you could say kingmaking came out. But yes, if you are allergic to kingmaking, as many people are, well, it's back in this Cole game too, just like it is in many games.
Yeah, it's difficult. I feel like kingmaking is part of the game in the same way that kingmaking is part of any game with above the table play.
That's right. That's another thing that Europe gamers need to think about is this is not just an on the game. Like Agricola, if I take a move that's bad for me to hurt you, it's worse for me than it is for you. Mm-hmm. There isn't kingmaking in Agricola. For the most part, you could block. I mean, you could, but it would be a null point. But for the most part, you can't. You have no choice but to do actions that are only good for you. In Arcs, there's a lot of gray area in how much your actions are helping others and hurting each other, and they're not that hard to parse out. And so it becomes a little more clear to the other players of the table how much an action that's good for you might actually also be even better for somebody else. And that could be a frustrating experience for some. Right. But again, it goes back to above the table play. Metagame harder, as we say often, jokingly, but it's kind of true.
Your turn doesn't end when your action on the board is over. You're still involved. You're talking to other people.
Your table presence will matter in this game. And did you capture some of my agents off a card earlier in the game? Is that the thing that's going to make me decide to hurt you and not the other person? It's happened to Jordan a few times.
I was just thinking it's happened to me many times.
So okay. And if you're a gamer who doesn't like that's going to play into whether you win the game or lose the game, well, there's a lot of above the table play happening here.
Yeah. I mean, we played a game earlier this week with Ben, and I had a chance to try and score a bunch in the third round, but it wasn't going to be enough to win, or to put myself in a better position for the fourth round and have my score be around where you guys were. And I took the second option. I was like, I don't want to take this from Ben and score all these points because I'm going to be the target in the final round. Right. Mm-hmm. And that's not a good place to be.
This is a game.
You got to think about
you
that.
You want to draft the leader in this game, 100%. Right. You want to be close second going into the last round, or far enough behind the leader where you can make it up and nobody else does.
Mm-hmm. Right? And you want to lift other people up. You don't want to absolutely shut someone out because then they're volatile to the whole table.
A great game to be in last position. So anyway, there's a long way of saying there's a lot of above the board play here. And if you're a player who's either doesn't like it or just not interested in that, or doesn't think that should be as important as everything on the board, probably not a game for you. Mm-hmm. Let's get into our final. I was going to say let's talk about who this game is for, but I think that's going to come out in our final thoughts on the game. So we've told you everything you need to know about Arcs as far as we can tell. Let's go into our final review on it. And in that, I will just ask each of you to answer the question of, do you think this is a game people will be playing in 10 years and why?
Well, I think first, let me just say, I think this is, the best game to come out this year, probably the best game to come out in the last few years. For all the reasons we've already talked about. I just want to say I really enjoy it and think everyone should give it a few plays to really see if it's for them and they can get past some of the, barriers to entry. In terms of whether we'll be playing this in 10 years, I think we will. And I think part of the reason for that is that this system is built to be expanded. You can have more leaders, more lore. You could have whole new sets of leaders and lore that are, like an A deck or a B deck from Agricola, where, okay, these are new abilities that are going to interact with one another. We're just going to play with those, right? And then you can have a whole new campaign that has, 24 new fates. And, in the campaign, we didn't even mention it. This is the Blighted Reach campaign. There's, Blight in this sort of section of the universe.
I didn't even think about that. The fact that it's a named campaign does lead the door open to having other entire giant boxes of campaigns.
Right. And Blight's a big part of this campaign. There are leaders that are all about supporting the Blight or putting down the Blight or whatever. Okay, now we're moving to a different area of space. There's no Blight. There's something completely different.
Could be
and
a different
whole
map.
New sets of fate, maybe a new map. So, but even forgetting the fact that this is going to be expanded in the next few years, which Cole's already mentioned that he wants to work on expansions for this game, what we already have has so much to explore. 3 different modes, all of which are valuable. The leaders and the lore and the draft is such a fascinating part of many games like Age of Innovation, where, okay, we're going to get better and better at drafting these cards and setting up our starting positions. And then the campaign where we're going to think about, okay, do I need to pivot into a B or a C fate? What are all these different fates that are in the game going to do to the final act of this campaign? Where do I want to be? How do I set myself up? All of those combos and all of that depth to explore is present. So I can't imagine that we won't be playing this in 10 years. I think there's going to be so much to explore and so much rewarding, play to be found there. So I'm really looking forward to getting deep, deep, deep with ARX.
Yeah. Drew, where are you at with this game?
Yeah, everything Jordan said, basically. I think I'll be playing this for a long, long time. I love the emergent storytelling aspect of it. I think it's the best example of a board game that's bringing like sort of pseudo RPG elements, storytelling elements, but the backbone is so interesting, and it's such a compelling strategic and tactical game that I think I'm just gonna play it forever. Like, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, so I hope we've given a good post-mortem on why this game has garnered so much attention, why you're hearing about it so much right now, and also maybe given enough reasons why it may or may not deserve it. For me, it's clearly the game of the year. The only question left is it the game of the decade? I think it is a generational game in a sense, in terms of I think it will define this era of gaming. I think people are going to be talking about it for quite a long time. I think, and why? Because I think it does something that new. I think it does give people almost a lifestyle game. This is a desert island game in the same way that Agricola is, where it's just like, I don't care how many times. There's like chess or Go. It's like, I don't care how many times you played it. Like it's only as interesting to you as the time you're willing to give it. Like there is that much you can learn from it. There is that much that the skill ceiling is that high. And then you just add in this whole concept of the storytelling, the emergent storytelling, the campaign. And it is almost like the only game you need out, like you could build a whole life just around playing ARX. And like, I wouldn't think that's crazy. Like I would get it. Like there are many players like Lumen who basically only play Agricola. And like, I get it. Could I sell my entire collection to just play Agricola and be happy? Probably could. ARX is pretty close to that level, I think. Like one thing that's interesting, I do find at the end of a game of ARX, I don't want to play ARX again for a minute. Like, especially at the end of a campaign. Like it is emotionally and brain draining in a way that some games aren't. I feel that way about Agricola often. And one thing I did notice at the end of both ARX games and Agricola games where I'm like, I need a break. The next day, I don't need a break anymore. And I'm kind of like, no, I can play again.
An ARX campaign is like riding a roller coaster. Like it's exciting, it's thrilling throughout the whole time, but then you get off and you're like, okay, maybe I don't want to ride that right away. Like, I'll wait a little bit.
Right. But I will say the base game, when I finish a base game of ARX, I want to play again immediately. Yeah.
So, I mean, look, the game is exceptional. It's really special. I think there are a lot of people in our hobby that are not going to like it. I think a lot of people who backed it are not going to like it. Not a lot, but I think there's a section of people who backed it who just thought it was going to be a 4X or a space game and are going to find something very different. I think the people who would be drawn to this campaign might not be drawn to this type of game. I actually think there's a lot of people, RPG people, people who are very interested in stories and LARPing, who won't play this game because they're going to look at it and think heavy Euro. But like the campaign, I think is something that's great for people who are not into heavy Euros. I mean, I actually think this could be baby's first heavy Euro if what you love is D&D, or what you love is like emergent storytelling or things like that. Like you could really LARP the hell out of this and have a good time. It's going to be a big teach, but outside of that, like, I don't know. I think a lot of the people who will hate this game and love this game are going to come to it not this year.
Interesting.
And in fact, I think a lot of people who are going to dislike this game got it now, and I think a lot of people who are going to love this game will find out about it later. But yeah, I just think there's a lot going on here. I think there's a lot to love, and I think it warrants all the hype and attention that it's getting, even if it's not a game for you. I think it's a game that, like all generational games, are games that every gamer has to at least play once.
It's definitely a monumental step for legacy games, I think. I always compare it to Pandemic Legacy. You have that one legacy deck where you're drawing cards until it says stop, and then it's exciting. This is that game, but every player has one of those decks, and
Right.
the way that they interact is
that's
just
well
so novel and interesting.
And then it just resets and it becomes an entirely new game the next time. Yeah. Well, that is ARCS. We're going to get this under 2 hours, which is awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming on, Drew. It was a pleasure having you finally on the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And thank you for your beautiful piano playing.
Oh, of course.
Anything you want to talk about? Any social media you want to shout out? Or
No, you can find me Drew Conley Composer. I'm a composer full time, and I'm also on YouTube at the Board Game Composer. Sometimes I work on board game apps, which is fun to kind of pull my career and my hobby together.
Did you make Root music? Is that we played something that you made once?
Yeah, so I wrote some like fan inspired music for Root a few years ago, but I do work on like a current version of a digital Ticket to Ride, which has been a lot of fun. So
that's amazing. I love that you've brought those two worlds together.
Yeah,
that's awesome. Jordan, anything you want to say at the end?
You can find me sometimes streaming on YouTube at Optimal Play. Drew and I taught the Blighted Reach, the campaign expansion.
Yeah.
So you can get the
if you
rules
want to
there.
get a good teach on the Blighted Reach, of which there is only one at the moment on the internet, go where?
Optimal Play.
Optimal Play.
And we have some gameplays there of the base game, and you'll see more gameplay coming soon, hopefully.
Awesome. All right. Well, I hope you both have an excellent rest of your summer. And with that, you've been listening to Game Brain, produced and edited by Matthew Robinson, Tom Donnelly, Trey Alsop, and Ben Mandelker. Special thanks to Daedalus for our incredible music. More on Daedalus at GameBrainPod.com. You can reach us by email at contact@GameBrainPod.com. Thanks for listening, and go play some friends with game. Go play some games with friends, or go make some friends with games. Did I even say that right?
I think we have to redo the whole podcast.
take two.